restart that and go back to here. So, we talked about spring break on Monday, and I didn't think about this until literally when you guys left on Monday. Should have thought about that before, but it's been a weird semester. As far as I'm aware, the majority of you guys don't have spring break with your high schools next week. I've been told that, at least for other students, it is this week, the week after Easter, so between the 7th and the 14th, or at least the week of the 10th, whatever, between the 10th and the 14th, or for our purposes, between the 10th and the 13th, because we don't come to class on the 14th anyway. So since we're doing review today, and rather than like taking off next week and us forgetting what we've been studying and then coming back the week after, and then having a week where I'm going to be coming to class, but I imagine most of you won't be showing up, would it be easier for most of you guys if we just move spring break to when you guys have spring break? Is there any major objections to that? So there is, well, you say it's the week after the first week of April? That will be this week too, wouldn't it? It's not, because this is the first week of April, because the first day is on a Saturday, so that doesn't count. Yeah, so that's this week. Yeah, so that's going to be for all of us. And then this will be our last week of classes. Right, I've been told that as well. Everybody says, oh, well, it's after prom, and everybody's saying prom's on the 7th, and that's that week as well. It's all falling on the same week, for what I've been told. And that will give us one more week of catching up with notes. We'll be here on the last day of class, the 24th, and then we've got exams. And that's it. So we have this last week to like chill and then come back and do whatever we have left. Hopefully maybe I can do a movie day on the last day. Or maybe that Wednesday, and then we'll come back for a review on the last day. But yeah, so does that work for everybody? Or is there any like major complaints about that? Since this is my biggest class, this is when I have to make the decision. Because I can't wait until the next class to make the decision and just like send out a mass email, because that'll just get sloppy. So is that good for you guys? No major problems? We're moving spring break to April. So we're going to be here next week for the test. The test is Monday. If you have issues, let me know, and you can, because you said that. You can take your test when you get back. Just let me know. Just email me, and because we have a testing center in a school. Yeah, so that's not a problem. Yeah, if anybody does have to be out next Monday or whatever, just email me, and we can take care of your test in the testing center. So that's like not an issue, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, so be here next week. That's the long and short of it. I just wanted to get that out and let everybody know. I'm probably still going to send out like a mass email or like a Blackboard message, because I know a lot of my online people don't watch the videos. So, yeah. Okay, that's that. That's the major thing I needed to get to you guys. Also, the other major thing is today is when papers are due. So if you've got your papers, turn them in, I guess, at least at the end of class, if you have them on you. If you don't, you can email them to me at my Francis Marion email as soon as possible, please. Technically they're due today, but if you get them to me a little bit late, it's fine. I'm not gonna freak out too much. I've got a lot to grade over the next little while, so it's not like I'm going to be jumping right on it right away. So, it's going to be a thing. If you have them on you right now and you're waiting because you don't have a staple in it, don't worry about it. I'm going to bring the ones I've got to the front office and staple them before I leave. That's not, I've got some professors that are weird like that, but I'm not one of them. That's all I got. Any questions from you guys before we do the last literal 2 slides in the review? Great. Okay. Let me swap back to extending the displays and fixing this because it's, oh wait, it shouldn't be like that. There we go. That, and then, okay, so let's get back to the notes. I was concerned there was going to be an issue since I did it so last minute, but it seems like we're all okay. I'm glad. And also, it's really easy to reschedule a test in here compared to Tri-County. Geez, they made it a nightmare. So I still kind of have PTSD from that. So we did the election of 1912. Roosevelt had the Bull Moose Party / Progressive Party. Taft was the Republican Party. Democrats had Woodrow Wilson. Eugene V. Debs was running the Socialist Party, and long story short, Woodrow Wilson won. So that's what all that is about. It was a whole big race, but Woodrow Wilson won. Okay. So Wilson being basically as opposed to Roosevelt's progressive policy as one could get, he still agreed with how Roosevelt worked as a president, that the president should be a strong, active leader, not just like running things as like a passive administrator, which I guess is largely why Wilson is remembered, also because, he was around when World War I happened. So he did tariff reduction, graduated income tax, which again came from the populist agenda. 16th Amendment allowed for income tax, which had once been deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Because as they lowered tariffs, the government needed some form of income. But even then, this income tax only applied to incomes over $4,000 a year, which meant that 90% of Americans weren't affected at all. And the rates ranged from 1 to 6% on incomes of $500,000 or more. So, it was barely felt even by those it affected. It's like, oh no, I mean, I've got an image that comes up in a minute that's super dramatic. Oh, income taxes, the new slavery. It's it's 1 to 6% on the wealthiest 10% in America, and most people aren't even feeling it. And those that do feel it don't really feel it because they're stupid wealthy. So by the midterms, Wilson had done much of what he had planned to do when he was running. However, the resurgence of the Republicans, which is the Progressive Party essentially, in Congress forced him to be more progressive in order to get anything done. We had the Adamson Act, provided overtime pay, Keaton-Owen Act, banned child labor, Workmen's Compensation Act, provided insurance in case of injury. So these various progressive acts, especially for the good of the worker, that we think of today as being pretty normal things, came about during Wilson's presidency, And Wilson was very much against progressive reform, but because of the shift in politics in his second year, he kind of had to move with progressivism rather than just stonewalling. So it's fairly interesting. This image is actually in the book. It says Wilson, not considered a jovial man, Wilson is seen here enjoying himself as he takes office. Taft seems to be enjoying himself too. Taft's, I guess, ready to leave. This is typically how Wilson is seen. And even here, Wilson's not really seen as being like, he's not demonizing the progressive side. He's just like, progressives just want to have permission to interpret the Constitution according to Darwinian principle, recognize that the nation is a living thing and not a machine. You know, the other side sees things differently, and all they wish is the permission to do so. So here's that really dramatic, the slave of liberty, and you've got, you know, income tax there around her neck. It's like, oh, so dramatic. Here's a more positive view of Wilson, delivering the goods, tariff revision, trust regulation, et cetera, et cetera. And that was just the first year. This isn't really mentioned in the book, but I should mention it because, well, it needs mentioning. Wilson was also a terrible human being. Extremely racist, extremely anti-Semitic. You know, all the bad stuff we saw before progressive era, you know, all the eugenics and anti-immigrant stuff, that was all Wilson. He was all about that. If you're familiar at all with I can't just call it a film, the propaganda piece, Birth of a Nation, you know, it was literally made by the Ku Klux Klan as a propaganda film that essentially had the Klan as like the saviors of America. He screened that at the White House during his presidency and stated that the only problem he had with the film was how true it was, that, you know, we were beset by lots of racist words, I suppose would be the next part of that statement. Yeah, Wilson was an awful person. Did some decent stuff during his presidency. Terrible human being. Anyway, so during this era, the government did become better for the average American, at least. Food and medicines were safer. Children could go to school rather than being forced to work. Women laborers were not exploited, at least to a lesser degree. Political officials had actually responded to their constituents because they were now being, directly elected. Environmentalism, conservation, preservation, etc. Laissez-faire was being challenged, but we still had individualism and competition as being good and healthy. And as we saw, progressivism was not this singular movement. There was no like single person who thought of progressivism. It was like the leader of progressivism. I mentioned this to my Tuesday, Thursday class. Roosevelt was like the progressive president. He led the Progressive Party, but he was also, you know, a moderate reformer. He didn't want things to go too far in either direction. so there was no like central authority on what progressivism was. It came from different movements, different groups. Leaders usually came from the middle class, but worked with the rich or poor based on what the issue was. And while there were still conservatives who fought against these changes, by 1920, by the end of the First World War, these reforms had changed the majority of America without some violent revolution, which by this point was very much in the back of people's minds because that had happened in Russia, which we'll get to after the test. So, I guess I need to change back to duplicate because I can't actually, let's do this one more time. I don't know why it won't just, I guess the size of the screen's different? I don't know. Anyway, so let's go to the study guide. All right. So, all the way back to, which chapter was this? 19, so back to chapter 17. All right. Find my test. It's kind of been buried by stuff. All right, let's get started. So we had the various ways of immigration. What were some countries that made up the first wave of immigration from Europe? What's that? We had Germany, Ireland, and any others that just like, because there were two like specific regions. The first wave, England was a major one too. So we're looking at Northwest Europe. So for the second wave, what will we be looking at? Well, for Europe. Italy, Greece. These are later waves, so we have Russia. And that is Southeast Europe. So keep those in mind. Okay. Now there are other countries for both of those, but just kind of remember the general locations. Like for the first one, you also have, say, Scandinavia. For two, you have like Poland as well. But just remember the general locations and where those fit in. So as far as industrial workers, we had a lot of immigrants. Well, I'll just read this. Besides the immigrants, where did most of the industrial workers come from? So we had the immigrants coming from overseas, but where else did the immigrants come from within the United States? What's that? Within the United States, like what sector of the population? What's that? I can't understand you, sorry. technically, but I'm looking at like a larger group than, what's that? No, not an ethnic group, like a, less specific than that, or more specific than that, rather. Like what sector of the what am I trying to say without giving it away? Oh, not religion-wise. So they're becoming industrial workers. What kind of workers were they before? Yes. Yes. They were farmers. When I'm like, what sector? Like, because they were agricultural workers and then they became industrial workers. But yeah, they were farmers, and as we've seen throughout the entire book so far, farming was bad work. It was very easy to lose your entire farm, and now they at least had cities to go to. So yeah, that was a multiple choice, so it's pretty easy to at least know which one you're looking for there. Let me make sure. Okay. All right. On to unions. While this wasn't the first union, what was the name of the first powerful union in the United States? This was the first real big union we had in the United States. I mean, it was also like the first one we even talked about in the book. Say that again? No. I think it might be a little ahead. This is it's a very antiquated sounding name. Yes, it was the Knights of Labor. Yeah, the Noble Order of the Knights of Labor. Again, just like if you go through the book, I just grab stuff that's in bold. And under organizing unions, you have unions, collective bargaining, and then Order of the Knights of Labor. Like, yeah, okay. That's the one I'm going to use. Again, multiple choice. You only really need to know Knights of Labor. This is talking about the Knights of Labor. At what rally did an anarchist throw a bomb, turning public opinion against the Knights of Labor? Which is also bold in the book. This was a real big, important rally. It's a huge historical event for unions. Like a bunch of cops got killed, but it was mostly them shooting through the crowd at each other. I'll say a bunch. It was like 6. Haymarket Square. multiple choice. Um, we have a fair few union things, so moving on to the next one. This is another union that was compared to the Knights of Labor. The Knights of Labor did not like to use strikes. This union, however, did like to use strikes to get their ways because strikes were very effective. So this was a union after the Knights of Labor kind of lost their power and used strikes to get their message across. Yes, American Federation of Labor. That one's a little more self-explanatory. It's not quite as obtuse as the Knights of Labor. Feels like we're talking about some medieval guild group or something. All right. If you were here for the video, hopefully you remember this. Where did a major strike take place against one of Carnegie's steel plants after wages were dropped, which eventually led to a trade of gunfire with Pinkerton agents? The name of technically it was the name of the plant and the city it was in and also the name of the strike. It was all named the same thing. Homestead. It's the Homestead strike, and it was Homestead, Pennsylvania, and the Homestead plant. It was all just Homestead. Excuse me. Oh boy. Okay. My neck like that. I think this is the last strike we're going to talk about. Yep. Which businessman dealt with a strike after lowering wages but leaving rent the way it was and used federal troops to take care of the problem? Remember I used the same picture twice for this guy where he had people basically living at the plant, so he charged them rent, but then he also lowered lowered the pay without lowering the rent. So he was like squeezing the money out of them. So actually have to know this guy's name, which was also the name of his factory, so it all goes together. Pullman. The guy's name was George Pullman. But it was also the Pullman strike, if you want to know the strike's name. And also the Pullman Palace Car. Wow, spelled correctly. Car company. Company, factory, I don't remember. You only need to know his name. The stuff I'm putting in parentheses is just because I'm feeling real weird today. All right. All right, let me just take a peek here. All right. So I've only actually got one question for this. This one is not multiple choice, so you need to know this one. Where was the world's first roller coaster built in 1884? Coney Island. Where is Coney Island? New York. I mean, Brooklyn, yes, but Brooklyn is also in New York. So you got to give me something a little more specific than Coney Island, if you can. But at least give me Coney Island. Hint, hint. A short answer, so you know how that works. All right, on to the populace. Damn it, I did it again. Well, it doesn't matter, it's in the question. Literally my first question here is, what was the name of the political party that formed after the failure of the Grangers to achieve certain legislation on behalf of farmers? Populace. It's just right there. I'm not even going to write it again. It's just right there. But do remember that technically the populace didn't there's not a direct line between the Grangers and the populace, but you can draw the similarities. They're all about helping farmers and working for certain rights that would aid agricultural groups. So, there is a line there, but it's not like the Grangers became the populace. Okay. And this is the only other one. I guess I should just... All right. Thank you, Train. Who led a group of disgruntled farmers and miners into Washington, D.C. to call for federal public works to counter the Depression of 1894, only to find himself arrested for trespassing. This was a populist leader headed from Ohio to D.C., picked up a bunch of dudes on the way, had a couple of thousand by the time he got to D.C., I believe. I only need his last name because the book says his last name 100 times, but only his first name once, and I immediately forget it.
Coxey?
Yes, Coxey, or Coxey, or whatever. I think his first name was Jacob, ? Let me look. Because they talk about Coxey's army, but that's about it. Yeah. There it is. Coxey's army. Jacob, yes. Jacob Coxey. All right. That's it for the populace, because then the rest of the chapter is, and then the populace went away. So on to the next section. Cities, immigrants, and the nation. What was the name of groups that came about around the turn of the century to help immigrants adjust to the United States, as well as providing certain levels of care for them? Very good. Mutual aid societies. Wow. Because remember, it was groups of immigrants forming together to help other immigrants. In what language were foreign language newspapers most often? In what language were foreign language newspapers most often printed in? German. Yeah, I mean, there were lots of German immigrants, so there were more German newspapers than other languages. It just makes sense. That's just how math works. On to the next one then. That's really all I've got for that one. There. All right. What was the name for neighborhoods segregated from the rest of the city, often consisting of a single racial, ethnic, or class group? Neighborhoods segregated from the rest of the city. No, it was the neighborhood that was the physical neighborhood segregated from the rest of the city. The ghettos. This one, I think I just put in here because, well, it's always going to be in here. I'm not entirely sure where I'd put it on the study guide, so I'm just going to put it right here. By the 1880s, what group of immigrants was completely banned from entering the United States? I heard it, but that was really quiet. The Chinese. You all should know this. Okay. And as far as crime, what was the... Oh, a couple other things here before we get to the crime. Name the two major major religious groups that came with a wave of immigrants, often clashing with the mostly Protestant United States. Catholics and Jews. And one more for this one. Rather than just like going into crime statistics and whatnot, because everybody likes talking about numbers, I'm just going to give you a definition. Compared to the mafia, what was the name for the organized Chinese crime in cities like New York and San Francisco around the turn of the century? The Tongs. Because we all know mafia, so I'm going to give you a slightly harder one. The Tongs. Chinese. Mafia, basically, because you know what the mafia is. All right. Now, moving back to the other, or to the next one. What was the name for the belief that foreigners pose a serious danger to one's native society and culture? Nativism. That one's nativism. And like I said, that one was certainly true in at least one case when the Europeans got here. Okay, that one is the next chapter, so no more short answer for a little bit. Let's see. What was a major reason that Eastern Europeans were seen as inferior immigrants compared to those in the past? Like, what was the big reason that Eastern Europeans were seen as being inferior immigrants? Yes, exactly. Because that was what I was telling my class yesterday. It's like they couldn't discriminate against them based on like skin color because they're literally from Transcaucasia. They're as Caucasian as you can get. But it's like, oh wait, they're like Russian Orthodox or Catholic or Jews. Like, oh, we can't have that. We got to find some way to discriminate against them. All right, that's cities. Let's see. A couple other unpleasant things. The pseudoscience that advocated biological engineering ensured desirable races continue to grow and sterilizing those seen as being unfit to reproduce. Eugenics, because hoo boy, we got to have that. I mean, it needs to be known, so I've got to put it on the test. You don't forget about people who haven't done that in the past, because some weirdos are still about that. Okay, 2 authors you need to know before we get into the city part. Who wrote The Melting Pot? Blech. Who wrote The Melting Pot, which gave an idealized version of immigrant assimilation, vision of immigrant assimilation? Don't worry, it's multiple choice. Because as you're about to see, I can't spell. Who wrote The Melting Pot? Yes. Israel Zangwill. Probably Zangwill. I keep pronouncing the W as a V because I'm used to Germanic pronunciation, but it's probably a W. What's that? He wrote The Melting Pot. Which was, seen as the idealized assimilation thing. And finally, who wrote The Souls of Black Folk? Described what all immigrants felt in America, neither being totally of their homeland or of this new country. Yes. W-E-B. Du Bois. I guess you pronounce the S unless that's French. I don't know. I mean, he's American. He wrote the Souls of Black Folk. Okay. Yeah, all right. So, on to cities. Starting out. Before 1880, what was typically the tallest structure in a town? Church steeple. If this was a short answer, I would be okay with church, but it's multiple choice, so don't worry about it. What was the name of the larger buildings up to 10 stories that were built using cast iron, but were later eclipsed by the larger steel structures? I wanted to make sure I heard that correctly. Yeah, they used cast iron. The skyscrapers used structural steel. Just think of, when you think about a skyscraper today, it's real big and shiny, and the cloud scrapers are smaller and kind of dingier because they use cast iron. Besides... Okay. Besides structural steel and electric elevators, what invention allowed for buildings to rise even higher than 30 stories? Water towers was important for the sake of plumbing. Radiators. This is another multiple choice, and water towers isn't on there. This is literally one answer is obviously right, and the rest of them are really dumb. Yeah. if this was a short answer, water towers would be acceptable. Yes, radiators, because if you're on the 30th floor and it's winter in New York and that building ain't insulated, you need heat or you're going to die. So yeah, radiators are nice. Okay. Let me go to the next question. Oh, yeah, let me do a couple more, one more positive one before we get to the bad stuff. With the advent of structural steel, what major bridge helped New York expand its influence across water? It's the big bridge in New York. Brooklyn Bridge. I might count off twice if you write Golden Gate. I've had students do that. It's the wrong side of the country, y'all. Wrong side of the country. Okay. I won't count off twice. That I'm not allowed to do that. But I will be very unhappy. Was the name of dwelling defined as having 3 or more families? It was often the staple of inner city life for immigrants. Tenement. It's a really tiny, overcrowded, dirty, fire hazard place. What happened when you put cheap labor and avoided factory regulations and made a business out of a tenement? What was that called? Like I say, I heard it. Yes, sweatshop. So when you made a not entirely legal business out of a tenement, it's called a sweatshop. What was the name of the factory that experienced a fire on its 8th floor, resulting in 146 deaths due to a locked exit door? Yes. Which, that was harrowing. Okay, just a few more for the cities. We had a lot for city stuff, but there's a lot of stuff happening in the cities. So disease was an issue in the cities. What utility would massively improve conditions if everyone could be properly supplied? What's that? What utility could vastly improve conditions as far as like sanitation if everyone could actually get it, but there was a supply issue? Or there was a massive demand and it was difficult to meet that demand. So it's like a city utility that would aid in, what's that? Yes. Again, it's multiple choice and I've got running water, but plumbing is correct. Running water / plumbing. Yeah, running water is super important when it comes to preventing disease. One more for this chapter, and then we'll be done. And I just summarized the last section of the book in a single, or the last section of the chapter in a single question. What was the name of the men sitting atop the political machines, running cities in order to suit their own needs? What's that? The boss. Yeah, that's not complicated. Just the boss. Great. That's that. So let's get to progressivism with the time we have left. Got a few there. All right. So, From what group did progressives borrow most heavily when it came to creating their goals? Yes. Because remember, I mentioned many times during this last chapter, it's like, hey, remember the populists that just like fell apart 2 chapters ago? Well, their ideas are still here. So yeah, progressives use the ideas of the populists a lot. What term, these 3 questions, this one and the next 2, are like the founding principles of progressivism. What term meant the ideas that will be measured by their practical consequences, and that knowledge came from experience rather than doctrine? Well, this is, it's in that same, this is before that. Pragmatism. Yeah, pragmatism is measuring an idea by its practical outcome. Like, hey, would doing this thing be most beneficial for the most number of people? Because it's being pragmatic, which often is seen as like kind of negative, because it's like, well, it's still going to hurt people. But like, yeah, well, it's going to hurt like a few people, but it's going to help the most amount of people. A lot of times it's seen as being selfish. It's like, well, it's going to hurt people, but it's going to help me. It's like, well, that's not really pragmatic. That's being selfish. And then the third one, the religious movement that had pastors like Walter Rosenbusch, because I just had to make myself say that again, telling Christians to follow the teachings of Christ and work among the poor. So what's the religious movement? Working among the poor, social gospel. Because once again, what was Jesus if not a social worker? I mean, dude gave fish and bread to people and freaking free health care for Lazarus. And depending on which gospel you read, he area of effect resurrected a bunch of dudes when he came back to life. So anyway, so yeah, these were the main tenets behind progressivism: populism, pragmatism, social gospel. And then, let me see. Yes. Where's it at? Okay. What group, originally founded in 1847, found new life during the era of progressivism, raised qualifications for those practicing medicine? Yes. American Medical Association. Because again, it was founded earlier than this era, but they got a lot more done. Okay. All right, the next one is about women, so I think technically, okay, this one is still going to be here. So, what was the name of the investigative journalist at the turn of the century who often exposed government corruption and shady corporate business practices? Muckrakers. That's certainly not a more regulated business practice. That's just the best place for me to put it, so don't worry about that. All right. On to women in the progressive era. All right. Who built the first settlement house in the United States? She's like one of the most important people in this chapter. No. Jane Addams. To be fair, though, Ida B. Wells is right up there as well. Yeah, Jane Addams built the first settlement house. And what was that settlement house called? The Hull House. One more thing on, well, I guess technically two more things for women here. Which amendment passed in 1919 gave women the right to vote? Here's a hint. It was passed in 1919. 19th. I'm not, the only reason I'm putting that here is because it's, well, I mean, it's real important, obviously, but also it's passed in 1919. Let's make it easy. I don't like, here, guys, here's a list of all the amendments. Remember their numbers. Like, I feel like that's awful, but if I can give you one that's kind of a give me, there you go. Okay. What was the common name for the 1910 White Slave Trade Act? It was named after the senator that pushed for it, which is kind of ironic considering it was supposed to help women. It was the dude's last name. Yes. Yeah, because it's named after the guy. What's that? The Mann Act, yeah. With two N's. Mann Act. Yeah, it's Congress. What's that? It's the Mann Act. No, it's just weird to me that, like, rather than using the actual name for it, they decided to call it the Mann Act. I mean, yeah, that's the guy's last name, but also it's like, really, guys? All right, on to things that changed for African Americans during the Progressive Era. Number of black leaders during the Progressive Era who suggested that blacks accept segregation and work on their own moral and economic development, although this person did secretly fund court cases against discrimination. Booker T. Washington. I can't specify gender here because we have a wild card. Which outspoken leader wrote for the Free Speech newspaper, investigated lynching, and had their newspaper building burned down for the trouble? There's Ida B. Wells. Which leader wanted immediate suffrage and helped to form the NAACP? W.E.B. Du Bois. He's back. See, there's several questions or several answers in this test that are used previously in the test. So, like, don't, it's like, oh, I've saw this answer before. It surely can't be this answer. Don't fool yourself. Okay, this is a weird one, but I have to. We're running out of time, so I need to try to explain it to you. I guess technically it would be up here because it's about prohibition and women were involved with the prohibition stuff. So this is a multiple choice question, and it's got 4 groups. And you tell me which one wasn't an actual group that fought for prohibition. And so what it is, this has got 3 groups that actually existed and one that I made up. So do you recall some of the groups that fought for prohibition, just offhand? What's that? No. I mean, I'm going to throw my favorite one out there just because. The Anti-Saloon League. That one was fun. Since we're running out of time, I'm just going to give these to you. The big one was the Prohibition Party. It's right there in the name. And then finally, there was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which I'm not going to spell out because we're running short on time. And remember, temperance is just the same as prohibition. Well, I'm not going to get into the technicality. So just keep those in mind. And so when you get to the question, there's one in there that's like, that's not one of these that actually existed. So yeah, that's just how I have this question. But I didn't want that one sneaking up on you, so I figured I'd at least mention it. All right, let's finish these up. We're almost there. What natural disaster destroyed Galveston, Texas? Helped create the commission form of government? Hurricane. It's Galveston, Texas. Of course it's a hurricane. I mean, the only other way it would obviously be a hurricane is if it was anything in Florida. What natural disaster wrecked San Francisco in 1906? Which caused a big legal battle over a dammed reservoir? Big old earthquake. It was said that the cobblestone streets rolled like waves. The earthquake was so bad. Okay, one more for this one. And then we have Teddy Roosevelt, because of course we have Teddy Roosevelt. What was the name of the valley that was dammed in response to the 1906 earthquake? What was the valley that was dammed in response to the earthquake in San Francisco? Yes. The Hetchy, I did not spell that wrong, Valley. All right, let's do Roosevelt stuff with the time we have left. I mean, it's Roosevelt. It'll be fine. All right. So before he was president, what was the name of the group he led in Cuba during the Spanish-American War? Rough Riders. What was his nickname due to his strong anti-monopoly stance? Trustbuster. I completely skipped Taft because nobody cares. After he came back from safari, what was the nickname for his new progressive party? Bull Moose Party. And who was the Democratic president in 1912 who actually did a pretty decent job of continuing the progressive agenda, who we literally just talked about? Wilson. Woodrow Wilson. And then the back is literally all extra credit, so I'll tell you that again on Monday. Yeah. Have a good weekend. If you have any questions, if you didn't get something because we were moving really quickly, let me know.
And yesterday, early in Columbia, I had to do something with
I can't hear you. Everybody's loud.
I'm sorry. I had to do something with my geometry class yesterday.